If it ain't broke, don't fix it. This is what my grandfather always used to say. If things stay the same, then you can learn how to behave, how to think, how to move in a way that is safe and reliable. How many of you have seen the movie Black Panther? In that movie, the young scientist character, Cherie, says, just because something works doesn't mean it can't be improved upon. What if there's a better way? What if we could improve something to make it accessible to more people? This is the spirit of adventure and experimentation about change. There's value to consistency and value to innovation. And we can discern for ourselves which is needed in any particular moment. But what about when the change is happening outside of you, around you? What about when others are changing and you aren't ready? You are happy with the status quo. Thank you very much. But maybe, just maybe, it's time to realize that others might not be as comfortable with the way things are as you are. Perhaps, although you are thriving under the current circumstances, others are more than ready for things to change. In our caterpillar story, Alex was ready to change before Homer had any inkling that change was even possible. It was hard to accept that what made him feel comfortable and safe was holding Alex back. And in the story that Gail just read, which is shared by our Christian siblings all over the world today, this story from Palm Sunday, the Pharisees, the Jewish leaders of the time, challenged Jesus to tell his followers to stop praising his teachings, as the Pharisees had found a way to be powerful and strong under the current regime. But when most people have been struggling under an oppressive system, and someone suggests that there is a better way, you could tell them to be quiet, but then the rocks would just cry out, Jesus says. The vision of a new way, a better way, is just too powerful. And Homer the caterpillar eventually realized that wings would be to his benefit too. If he could stop seeing himself as separate from Alex, he could realize that they were actually both the same. When others are changing or asking for change or demanding change, can we expand I into we? Can we get curious? Can we move into wonder? And can we try to imagine another way? The followers of Jesus had begun to envision together a world of more peace, more generosity, more welcome, more belonging, more justice, more love. That vision, however slowly, continues to change the world. I tell you that if they should hold their peace, the stones would immediately cry out.
So as Anne and I were coming up with the idea for this service, Anne suggested this topic, this idea, this theme of let go and let goo. And I immediately knew what she was referring to. But it was a realization that's come from sort of a recent, discovery that I had made, that I had found out about. I had always thought that when a butterfly went into its cocoon, that somehow its body changed and somehow it grew wings out of its back, and that this was just, the process that it underwent. But that's not what happens to the butterfly in the chrysalis. Instead, if you were to take a scalpel and you were to cut open a chrysalis, which I hope no one does, because I think that would be a way of killing beauty before it could be born. But if you were to do that, and you were to open it up, you wouldn't discover a half caterpillar, half butterfly. You wouldn't discover early in the process something that looks more like a caterpillar and a little bit like a butterfly, and then later on something that looks more like a butterfly but still has some caterpillar parts. No, that's not what you would find. Instead, you would find goo. Goo. The body of the caterpillar completely dissolves. And it is in that dissolution, in that chaos, in that complete breakdown of identity that something new and beautiful can come into being. So I'm going to hold that up as one of my images today. But I have a couple of other images to share as we're thinking about change, as we're talking about change today, as we're thinking about trusting change and what we need to do in order to hold change in our lives. The other image that I want to hold up is the image of threshing. Threshing is where we get the word threshold from. The threshold is the boundary point between a building and its outside, but it was also where wheat would be brought to be threshed. It would be laid at the boundary point between the inside and the outside. And it was in that place that threshing would happen. And threshing is an activity that is quite violent, actually. It is a tearing apart, it's a sort of violent tugging, a violent ripping apart of the plant that has been brought. So, if this is wheat, it is pulling it apart in order to pull out the seeds and pull out the parts that you would want to keep, and then setting to the side the chaff, which is the part that you want to release. So we have the goo, we have threshing, and then we have the greening. That's my last image for today. My last image for change is greening, and this is, Gail said she read that poem and she was like, I have no idea what that poem is about. It's called The Beautiful Changes, and what I think is really interesting about it is that it's not saying, it's not that the changes are beautiful, it's that beauty itself changes. Beauty in itself is always in the process of either becoming or perishing, but it can be in the process of becoming fuller. And so it talks about the changes in the seasons. It talks about the ways that right now we might look outside and see just the briefest little speckle of green. And we sort of see, a few daffodils that are poking up. In another month, it'll be so much louder. And we get to witness the beauty of that change, that sort of slow process of turning into beauty, becoming something fuller and more lively. How do we approach change in our lives? How do we hold it? What metaphors do we need to give us sustenance as we go through change? I think that there are 3 really valuable lessons in the images that I have lifted up today. The first one, the goo. Sometimes we have to trust in the breaking apart. Sometimes we have to trust in the ways that things break down and dissolve. in the ways that we can't necessarily foresee what the future is going to hold for us, in the way that, the structures and the organization and the habits and patterns that we have set up in our lives, all of those things that give us stability and safety and protectiveness, all of those things that we hold on to, sometimes we have to trust that when we let them go, we will find some renewal or possibility or hope on the other side of that. And there can be so many things that requires that trust or that demands that trust. It could be the breakdown of relationships. It could be grief. It could be major life transitions. All of those things require a trust that in the habits and patterns that you are releasing, something new and possible and good can come. And then the second one, the threshing. Sometimes change takes effort. Sometimes we have to engage in that effort. Sometimes we have to engage in that almost violent tugging in order to pull ourselves into a new place in our lives. And I'm thinking for us adults that sometimes we may have certain habits that are quite self-destructive, or patterns that have become quite problematic, relationships that have become toxic. And sometimes it takes an incredible exertion of effort in order to come out the other side. And then 3, the greening, the beautiful changes. This is the idea that sometimes change doesn't have to be terrifying. Sometimes change doesn't have to be intensely effortful. Sometimes it doesn't have to be violent or dissolving. Sometimes change can come to us in this way that offers almost relief and sweetness in the changes that we witness in our lives. And we can just be present to that. We can observe that. We can hold that and celebrate that as those changes are happening. And sometimes that can happen even with really difficult and complex things in our lives. I remember that for me, when I experienced the deepest loss that I ever experienced, the death of my husband, there was a moment. It was about 9 months later in which I woke up and I realized that I was not completely absorbed in the grief. There was this moment of relief, this moment of change. I don't know exactly how it happened, but it did happen. And I was able to hold that relief and celebrate that relief and change. Change can come in so many ways. Change demands so much from us. Our lives are always changing. We are always in the process of growing and developing and changing. Sometimes those changes are dramatic, sometimes less so. But I think the invitation here, as we reflect on these images, as we reflect on this service, is that we can ask what's needed from me in this moment. Is it effort? Is it trust? Is it relief and release? And whatever that is, my spiritual companions, I so hope that for you, what comes on the other side is as bright and beautiful as a butterfly.